meeting, full county board meeting. Clerk will call a roll, please.
Alt. Anderson.
Present.
Behrens.
Here.
Bills. Bowman.
Present.
Kokenauer.
Present.
Crow. Curtis. Hasbargen. Johnson. Crumweedy.
Present.
Lemie. McGinnis.
Here.
McTaggart.
Present.
Awful. Pursley.
Present.
Raymond. Stewart.
Here.
Sticknot.
Present.
Whitlow.
Here.
17 present. Mrs. Awful.
Mr. Chairman and board members, in the absence of Pastor Gibbs, Chad has agreed to give prayer tonight.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the opportunity to gather in your presence and to gather to represent our constituents. We just ask for wisdom on decisions that have to be made and for the future. And we just ask you to just bless everyone that's here in attendance. Amen.
Okay, you have the agenda in front of you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda? Mr. Hasbargen, is there a second? Mr. Bowman. All in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed, same sign. That motion passes. Minutes for the recess session on February 13th and a special session on February 28th. You've all received a copy of those minutes. Is there a motion to approve? Mrs. Awful. Is there a second? Mr. Bill seconds. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed, same sign. That motion is approved. Payroll. Mr. Crumweedy, is there a second? Mr. Whitlow. Any questions or comments on the payroll? Seeing none, the clerk will call the roll, please.
Anderson. Behrens. Bills. Bowman.
Yes.
Kokenauer.
Yes.
Crow.
Yes.
Curtis. Hasbargen. Johnson. Crumweedy.
Yes.
Lemie. McGinnis.
Yes.
McTaggart.
Yes.
Awful.
Yes.
Pursley.
Yes.
Shore.
Yes.
Sticknot.
Yes.
Whitlow.
Yes.
17-0.
Motion passes 17-0. Public comments. Any public comments this evening? Seeing none. Outside organization reports. Mr. Bergery isn't with us. Are there any other outside organization reports this evening? Seeing none, we'll start with the report of the Finance Committee.
Mr. Chairman and members of the County Board, your committee, who was referred finance, would beg leave to submit the following report on matters before them. The committee met at the Administrative Center on March 8, 2018 at 9 a.m. Members present were McTaggart, Bills, and Johnson. Anderson, Alt, Curtis, and Raymond were absent. Also present, County Board Chairman John Scherer, Finance Director Anita Speckman, Sheriff Derek Hagan, County Clerk Lisa Fancher, Treasurer Minnie Koontz-Hagan, Supervisor of Assessment Bob Yergler, 911 Director Eric Raymond, EMEA Director Eric Stacey, ICPHD Executive Assistant Cheryl Davis, Greg Steppen, with Compass Insurance, and Susie Werner with Homestar Insurance. The meeting was called to order. There were no public comments. Greg Steppen with Compass Insurance reported on behalf of Randy Schultz. A squad car hit a deer and the process is being handled. Sherry Johnson questioned the workers' compensation training. Finance Director Anita Speckman said Tim Drury with Bliss McKnight was on site last month and will be meeting individually with the department heads. Steppen said he will also follow up on the training. Susie Werner with Homestar Insurance said she received an email from Health Alliance stating wrong benefit summaries were sent out. The new summaries will be sent out. Department heads gave their monthly report. They are as follows. 911 Director Eric Raymond reported that he has not been able to locate any additional grants. Michael McTaggart suggested he contacted the Illinois State Police. EMEA Director Eric Stacey explained some of the expenses that occurred during the flooding, and he is collecting the receipts for reimbursement. Spectrum noted that Animal Control Administrator Dr. Youssef also brought claims for his nurses to be compensated for their time while they were assisted during the flooding. He listed their hours but not a rate of pay. Stacey and FEMA has reimbursable rates. Stacey said FEMA has reimbursable rates and he will check into it for this situation. Supervisor of Assessments Bob Yergler reported the Board of Review sent final notices out to complainants. His office is preparing to close out 2017 payable in 2018. Yergler said he is unsure of the implications of the flooding yet. Assessment relief will be available for property owners. Sheriff Derek Kagan reported a squad car accident involving a deer happened over the weekend. The car is currently at a local body shop. A deputy with 28 years of service retired in February and was replaced with a police officer who is already certified. Kagan presented the committee with two proposals in regards to public safety tax money. The first proposal requests the hiring of 2 sheriff deputies, training, uniforms, and equipment, and the purchase of 1 new squad car for a total of $110,000. The second proposal requests the purchase of a new live scan fingerprint machine, 16 new portable radios, 8 new MDC computers and docking stations, and 12 new tasers for a total cost of $108,800. Hagan said he would prefer the first proposal because it would increase staffing. Speckman said all final year and expense reports have been distributed to the department heads. An analysis was done on the general fund revenue because the 2017 final revenue ended up $203,066 less than budgeted. Speckman said at least $100,000 of this amount was within the circuit clerk fees. Speckman stressed that there is continued pressure on the general fund each year. Mike McTaggart suggested circuit clerk Lisa Hines attend next month's finance committee to help explain fluctuations in the fees they are collecting. Hagan explained some of the decrease in the fees has to do with the amount of personnel on the roads for the sheriff's department and the state police. Hagan also notified the committee of a new bonding procedure that was effective January 1st. Individuals that have Category B offenses will have a hearing to set their bond. If they choose not to post bond at that time, they can serve jail time and receive a $30 per day credit back towards their bond. This could have an effect in the coming years on what the circuit clerk's office collects in fees. Hope Wheeler with Clifton Larson Allen presented the Finance Committee with a fiscal year 17 audit. Wheeler said overall the audit report was unmodified. During the presentation, Wheeler stated that there is inadequate control over the functions of processing and recording financial transactions of the Sheriff's Office, including the commissary, in the commissary fund, due to the limited personnel. Speckman said she spoke with Hagan and he will begin reviewing the reconciliations and signing off on them once he has reviewed them. Speckman prepared a worksheet that compares salaries of our elected officials to other counties in Illinois. The committee was asked to review the worksheet for a decision to be made at next month's finance meeting. Hagan asked the committee to consider setting salaries internally rather than based upon a salary survey. He noted that the sheriff's position has 3 employees that currently have a higher salary than the sheriff. McTaggart responded that that's a valid point and needs to be considered. McTaggart addressed the unappropriated spending for offices and contract service budget overruns. Speckman said the budget for salt is $7,000, but the amount spent through January for salt is $7,500. The bill for February has not been received yet, but Speckman is estimating at least $6,000 in charge. Hagan offered to transfer $10,000 part-time administrative assistant line item to help cover the cost of the salt. The position was budgeted, but the position is no longer being used. Due to the loss of this position, which was full-time at 911 and part-time at the Sheriff's Department, Speckman said it has caused an increase in IT service calls. McTaggart suggested that the management committee look into the budget issue with the salt and perhaps the areas that might be oversalted. Johnson explained the committee didn't choose the bid to include the salt. Instead, the bid to pay per pound was accepted. McTaggart also addressed the matter of lawn mowing bids being sent to the county board. One of those bids is 60% higher than the budget, and the other bid is in line with the budget, but there is a different level of service associated with the vendors. Lastly, the management committee is also discussing spending money on offices to move people within the administrative center. From a financial perspective, no money has been budgeted for these items. Financial policies were sent to the committee for the review and need to be completed by the end of the fiscal year. The committee reviewed the quarterly cash trend prepared by Speckman. The committee reviewed claims due to the lack of a quorum. It was recommended to send the claims to the full county board for approval on March 13th, 2018. As there was no further business to come before the committee, the meeting was adjourned at 10:25 a.m., all of which is respectfully submitted, and I move for its adoption.
There's a motion on the floor to approve the Finance Committee report. Is there a second? Mr. Bills, any questions or comments about the report? Mr. Hasbargen.
Are we supposed to vote on these proposals submitted by the sheriff to accept or not accept them?
Not today.
Not today.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, the clerk will call the roll, please.
Barons.
Yes.
Bills.
Yes.
Bowman.
No.
Hogenauer.
No.
Crow. No. Curtis. Hasbargen.
No.
Johnson.
No.
Crumweedy.
Yes.
Lemay.
No.
McGinnis.
No.
McTaggart.
Yes.
Awful.
Yes.
Persley.
No.
Sure.
Yes?
Sticknot.
Yes.
Whitlow.
No.
Anderson.
Yes.
Well, looks like it's 9-9.
9-9, the motion fails.
Does Dan get the vote?
It is,
He wasn't.
Did you call Dan?
he wasn't here.
I was out of the room.
Oh.
Doesn't matter, there was nothing on it, it was not formed. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so does that mean their bills didn't get transferred to the full board?
The bills are here.
Yeah, I can't see that that's a problem. They're here.
Is Mr. Devine here?
Yeah.
Is there any issue with the report not being approved?
You're not spending any money in the report, are you? I mean, there wasn't a quorum in finance apparently, and I don't see where there's any money being spent. These are all recommendations.
That being the case, we'll move on to the report from Management Committee.
Mr. Chairman, members of the planning board, your committee to whom was referred to management services for Betty Reed, and Mr. Brown report from matters before us. Your committee met at the administrative center on March 5, 2018, 9 a.m. Members present were Barron, Hasbargen, Johnson, McGinnis, and Alpha. Charlie Alton, present, Wilson, Webb. Also present, finance director Andy Speckman, state attorney Joe Devine, ICPHD administrator Dee Schipper, maintenance supervisor Chris Bate, Jason Myers with Johnson Controls, Bob Vetter with Preeminent Development, LLC, Rescue Modeling with Nature's Views, and Lenny Davis with Science Republic. Meeting is called to order. It is moved by Larry Hasbargen, second by Ted McGinnis to approve the agenda. Motion carried by a voice vote. There were no public comments. Jason Myers with Johnson Controls spoke to the committee about the services Johnson Controls offers. Their objective is to look at ways to address some of the infrastructure needs throughout the county buildings and address energy inefficiencies with the utilities and use the savings to help pay for upgrades. Johnson Controls will also look into the county boilers and chillers and update lighting, light fixtures in buildings. Mr. Myers says the work can be done in-house or with local contractors. Mr. Myers asked the a second question of projects that are over 30,000 requiring a sealed bid process. Bill explained that Johnson Controls will handle the sealed bid process by putting out a request for proposals and receive at least 3 bids. The full disclosure to the committee guaranteed he installs furnaces which is a Johnson Controls company. Second, explain the savings Johnson Controls provides is guaranteed, and typically a check is written for savings at the end of the contract. Jerry Johnson stressed the need to work with local contractors whenever possible due to convenience. Bob Better with Human Development LLC presented an update cost reduction and refund agreement to the committee based upon conversations with State Attorney Jim Devine. The audit firm was previously approved by a management committee to perform a utility bill audit. Signed agreement. Devine had to change the fees payable from net 30 days to net 45 days. To remove the verbiage to be the award, of course, don't include costs of reasonable attorney fees to the prevailing party. The changes will be made and presented to the committee for approval. Parents discussed the lighting updates. Smart Walk did a very thorough walkthrough of the building with Drake. Drake is waiting for their proposal. Maintenance supervisor Chris Drake reported on the phone. The heat pump for the county boardroom is scheduled to be installed. David Moore with East Central Illinois Community Action Agency approached Drake regarding a problem with moles in the Head Start playground area. Mr. Moore stated they would split the cost of resolving the problem. Mowing bids, routine maintenance was performed in the buildings throughout the month. Drake will begin a plan for carpeting and other floor services at USDA office per their contract. Barron stated the fertilizer company has been notified and fertilizer will be applied to the committee. Barron's opened the mowing and weed spraying bids as follows. David One service, $13,515 per season for mowing, $40,000 for 3-year contract for mowing. No bid submitted for weed spraying. M&L Lawn Care weed spraying only, $708.50 for broadleaf weed control and bagworms, or $658.92 if service is prepaid. $326.70 broadleaf weed control, or $303.83 if service is prepaid. Falls 1 garden service, $10,725 per season for mowing, $32,175 for 3-year contract for mowing. No bids submitted for weed spraying. HL Landscape, $39,501 per season for mowing, $118,503 for 3-year contract for mowing. $2,300 for appearance for weed spraying, $6,900 for 1 application per season. Brandon LaRue notifying lawn care, $10,000 per season for mowing, $120 per acre for weed spraying, or $50 per appearance to spot spray. Nature's View, $16,335 per season for mowing. This includes weed spraying around trees, posts, fences, foundations, or border, or surrounding cycles. $46,791 for a 3-year contract for mowing. This includes weed spraying around trees, posts, and foundations that are bordered around the cycles. $335 for currents for weed spraying. $1,005 for 3-year weed spraying contract. Nature's View added that the prices for spraying are only valid if they are awarded the mowing contract. Their bid includes applying non-selective herbicides to pre-emergency weeds outside of turf areas such as sidewalks and tracks and pavement. Also, due to volatility in the state of Illinois legislative, prices may be renegotiated should governmental regulations increase the cost of doing business during contract period. For example, but not limited to implementation of landscape service tax or significant increase in minimum wage. The committee reviewed and discussed all bids presented. It was moved by Johnson to approve the bid submitted by Nature's View. The motion failed due to a lack of a second. Volunteer is budgeted at $10,300. All bids submitted are higher than the amount budgeted. Segment stated there is also an approximate $6,000 budget shortfall for Smith Line. Maintenance and repairs is running low with a forecasted amount of $20,000 within 3 months. Into the year, and budget is $55,000. It is moved by McGinnis, second by Barb Hopple, to send all lawn garden service and nature receive bids to the county board for discussion and action. Roll call vote was taken, motion carried. An update was given on office space and administrative matters. McGinnis said he met with IDA Director Ken Berry, and he is opposed to sharing office space and would prefer to occupy the same amount of space he is currently in to accommodate the hiring of future secretarial position. McGinnis also spoke with Regional Superintendent Greg Murphy about moving their office, and their only requirement is a phone line. County Clerk Lisa Fancher has 2 storage rooms for election items that McGinnis thought could be used, but after speaking to Fancher, it doesn't appear to be an option at this time. There is a custodial room for restrooms that could be used for environmental health. The room has a sink, which will be helpful when exams are given. Further discussion was held on the space availability and how to arrange offices. It is moved by Johnson and second by Asperger to move ICANN into Veterans Office. Veterans will relocate to IDA. The IDA office will move into the County Board Chairman's office, and an office will be constructed for the County Board Chairman. Roll call vote was taken, motion carried. Space for Health Department will be discussed at a later date. During committee, the full board approval is required before moving commences. A building permit is also required before constructing any offices. Second, provided a copy of the Champaign County Regional Planning Commission lease, which states the annual rent amount will increase annually using the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index inflation calculator. The updated cost per square footage for the administrative building is $6.53. It was moved by Johnson, second by Alpert, to send a letter to Champaign County Regional Planning Commission advising them of their lease renewal and increase in rent from $6.20 per square foot to $6.30 per square foot. Roll call vote was taken, motion carried. The committee reviewed the claims. It was moved by Asperger, second by Alpert. Paid the claim subject to county board approval, motion carried by a roll call vote. It was moved by Alpert, second by Asperger, to adjourn the meeting until 11:30 a.m. Motion carried by a voice vote, all which respectfully submitted, and I move that it's adopted.
There's a motion on the floor to approve the management report. Is there a second? Mrs. Awful seconds. Any questions or comments about the report?
I would just reiterate that, and I'm not getting into who needs what office space, but just from a purely financial perspective, we're voting here to spend money. We don't know how, there's no budget or estimated costs or anything, and as was pointed out, we're behind, we're over budget in some other areas on items coming out of management committee, and I think everyone just needs to be aware that we're spending money that we don't have even an estimate of what we're spending, and that seems a little dangerous, that we're just going to approve something with no notion of what it's going to cost us and where the money's going to come from, because we're over budget in other areas.
Would you like to make a motion to address that?
You have to make a motion for separate consideration.
Make a motion to separate, we consider that. And just to be clear to everyone, I don't want to get into who's, I'm doing this purely from a financial perspective. I think we can all come to, I don't necessarily have any problem with the motion itself, assuming we can address the financial issues.
Okay, that's the second paragraph on the next to the last page of the report. Sure.
Item C on
I'll second that for a second.
Seconded by Mr. Raymond for separate consideration. Is there any questions or comments about what we're going to separate out? Mr. Bills?
Mr. Chairman, would we plan to send this back to committee then, if we was to separate it out?
Well, right now, we're going to separate it out, and then we can discuss what we'll do with it.
That's with another motion. Yeah, that's where I was going with it. I'd be fine with that.
You want to amend your motion?
I'll amend my motion to
Send
make
it,
it a separate consideration, send it back to them,
okay.
consideration of financial issues.
I'll second
You still want to second that? Mr. Raymond still wants to second that. Okay, are there any other questions or comments? Mr. McGinnis, did you have something?
I agree with Mike. One of the things we did fail, as much as I'd like to see stuff moved around, is a cost estimate as far as the construction piece, okay? And I am probably one, the biggest supporter of doing this, so.
Is anyone else?
I got a question.
Go ahead.
What's going to come in the ICANN office? I don't see that in here unless I'm overlooking
We
it.
can't hear you.
What's coming to the ICANN office?
Well, let's separate it out first.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, clerk will call the roll.
Bills? Excuse me. Bowman? Okenauer?
Yes.
Crow?
Yes.
Curtis?
Yes.
Asbargen?
Yes.
Johnson? Crumweedy?
Yes.
Lemay? McGinnis?
Yes.
McTaggart?
Yes.
Awful?
Yes.
Persley?
Yes.
Raymond?
Yes.
Shore?
Yes,
Sticknot?
Yes.
Whitlow?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Barons?
Yes.
18-0.
that motion approved 18-0, so we've separated that paragraph out. The motion includes sending it back to the committee. Is there any questions or comments about that part of it? You had something, Mr. Raymond?
Yeah, what's going into the ICANN office?
Go ahead.
The nutshell plan was to move the VAC into the ICANN iArts office and IDA, and they will be getting a couple work studies, basically college veterans that are in college, to help with further outreach, and then ICANN iArts to either VAC and IDA to where John is right now, and then build an 8x10 or whichever combination, but the committee kind of felt that the chairman should have a spot still. So I will work on some price estimates. I also talk to the VAC to see what they're willing to contribute, since it's to benefit them the most. If
Mr.
that's okay with
Chairman,
everyone.
Chad, you had drawn a picture on the board if you want to explain any of it.
Yeah. Thanks, Barb. Yeah, if you look back at the calendar, basically the plan for the animal control was the current office that the chairman operates, which is down at the bottom, is 13 by 14. Then off to the right-hand side, make a little 8 by 10. Then up higher, where the doorway is to animal control, that would turn into a mini conference room. I have 16 feet up there, but it's actually 18 feet when I pulled the schematics. So you'd have an 18 by 14 conference room, which would help address for negotiations and everything like that. And it's also a little mini spot, and then the VA would go into the IDA/ICANN iArts, and then they would move across to the current location. So the move requires just putting up a fake wall, and then we'll have space for negotiations, or if whatever IDA they need to meet. It provides a smaller board conference room along with a spot for both entities.
Does that answer your question? Does anybody else have any questions about this?
I do, Mr. Chairman. For next, as presented to the board next time, it would be nice to see those estimates, or several options. And also the increase in rent, if we knew the total square footage, give us some figures there so we could offset some of the costs maybe with the rent increase.
I don't think any of them that are moving or renting.
Yeah, veterans doesn't pay.
There's an overall net effect on the building if we're raising the rent per square foot.
Oh, okay.
Follow. From the other vendors.
Are we moving anybody that's paying?
No, none of the people.
It doesn't matter, there'll be more money taken in enterprise.
Well, what'll happen is the cost per square foot is going to increase in FY18 if you fund these expenses. Because what I do for management is that cost analysis at the end of every fiscal year that shows the cost per square foot to maintain the building. And so the cost per square foot will increase next year over this year. But you're right, then the question becomes, do you increase, that would have to be addressed by the management committee. Do they increase rent from other tenants to pay for the improvements? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
That would have to be something, a lot of the renters have multi-year contracts, so it would have to be figured
Correct.
down the road as they come due. But that's definitely something we can look at.
Okay, Mr. Bills.
The only thing I'll mention is you may want to get an architect or somebody involved with this, because you start sticking up walls here and there inside these little rooms, you usually end up with an HVAC problem.
Not only that, but I don't know, the walls in the ICANN office, has there been any investigation as to whether those can be moved or not? Are those load-bearing walls?
When we did the walkthrough, it was pointed out that they weren't.
Who pointed it out?
I think the only load-bearing wall actually is this one here. One of these two tall ones. And that was something I think we discussed when we were doing the road.
Okay. All right, well, I guess the motion is by Mr. McTaggart, is to send it back to the management committee. Is there any, we can vote on that? Is there any further discussion?
We already voted on that.
Yeah, it was all in one.
So we don't have to vote on it again now after our discussion?
Nope,
Oh, good.
just the balance of the report.
Then we can go to the balance of the report, after which we'll talk about the lawn mowing. Are there any questions about the remainder of the report? Seeing none, the clerk will call the roll.
Bowman. Kokenauer.
Yes.
Crow. Curtis. Hasbargen. Johnson.
Yes.
Crumweedy. Lemay.
Yes.
McGinnis.
Yes.
McTaggart.
Yes.
Awful.
Yes.
Persley.
Yes.
Raymond.
Yes.
Shore.
Yes?
Sticknot.
Yes.
Whitlow.
Yes.
Anderson.
No.
Barons.
Yes.
Bills.
Yes.
18 to 1.
That motion's approved 18-1. Now we'll talk about the mowing.
The two that we were sending calls and, Nature View are up on the backboard there also. I don't know if you have questions or, I believe both companies are represented here if you have questions for them. Falls is $10,725, Nature View is $16,335 for 1 year, or $32,175 for Falls for 3, or $46,791 for Nature View for 3. So, I guess we gotta decide who we want to do it and how many years we want it for.
Mr. Anderson?
I apologize for my absence, lately, but maybe I missed something. Brandon LaRue, snow plowing and lawn care, 10,000 per season. Typo was an issue. So, opinion. If you want to, I guess, I didn't understand why it wasn't considered, yeah. I believe he was out, I think somebody said he was
Mr. Kokenauer?
Go ahead and finish.
No, that's why I asked the question. If he was out station.
Right.
in my-
It looks to me like the only difference in the major difference in the pricing is the weed spraying, correct? Some of them have the weed spraying included and some don't, so how are we gonna address that?
Right, we're not really comparing apples and to apples here.
Correct. I don't think we're really, can't we get them to bid so we're comparing apples to oranges? Can we make here's my question, I guess, can't we make a form, this is what this is gonna cost, this is what the weed spraying is gonna cost, this is what the lawn mowing is gonna cost, so we can at least get apples to apples?
I think that's the way the requests for bids were sent out, but people don't always respond according to what you send them.
And some, they were given the option to do the spraying, or spray it or not spray it.
Part of the problem here right now also is the fact that with this being the month of March, we need to make some decision now. Anyone else have any questions, comments? Anyone care to make a motion on how to proceed? Mr. Bills?
It appears that we did not budget anything for weed spraying, and that's where our dramatic cost problems are. So I would suggest at this point, we better continue just mowing and stay with our current program. If we feel that we need to do a lot of spraying, we need to get it budgeted.
We probably didn't budget for weed spraying because we don't have any money to do that with.
Well, if it feels it needs to be done, it needs to be done in the budget.
We need to get it going.
Mrs. Crowe?
Well, didn't we in the past, when we needed to have weed spray, have it done on an as-needed basis, and then it was a few $100s or something like that, and we had someone come in and do it?
There was a time in the past when the maintenance supervisor was qualified to do that, and that's how it was handled.
But in the last year, we had weeds out here in the trees and
Right.
other times like that. We called someone individually to come
Right.
in as needed, and then found the money to pay whatever the bill was, $300, $400, $500. Isn't that
I
right?
think that was 2 years ago we did that, and of course, at that time, our maintenance budget had a little money in it. That's the way it's looking this year.
The maintenance, Chris's portion, Mr. Gregg's portion of the bit, or overall management?
Maintenance, Chris's budget. And, you know, past years, we didn't have $6,000 overrun on salt.
Well, the salt continues to be a problem.
Did we have a motion?
Not yet.
Do you know what we paid last year for mowing? Was it a 3-year contract or just a 1 year?
Around
Anita?
$10,300, which is where this year's budget came from.
Can you tell us how much about the weed spraying, about how much it was? Because didn't we budget for per occurrence
Last year?
last year?
I
What was
think
it
it was
last?
2 years ago that we sprayed. 3 years ago? I think it was 2. I don't think it was last year. I think it was the year before.
I can look.
And while she's looking that up, we also need to be thinking, are we going to do 1 year or 3 years?
What we need to recall as well is, did the fellow who did the tree work out here at the time also do the spraying, or was that 2 different entities? It was done at the same time, I remember. When we did one, it became apparent we needed to do the other. I think it was 2 different.
I think so, too. But I swear to you.
Mr. Bowman,
I'd make a motion that, we hire, Hall's Lawn Service for a 3-year contract to mowing.
is there a second to that motion? Mr. Raymond seconds. Are there any questions or comments about the motion? This is awful.
Why a 3-year? Can you explain that?
Oh, it's on? I just seem to have a 3-year contract. As you look at the rest of them, he's for a 3-year contract, it looks like he's the cheapest for a 3-year, and you're looking at $46,000 with the other, party that we were talking with, $46,971. So that's why I think a 3-year is the best way to go. We're locking in our costs for 3 years.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, I agree with Kevin. There's no savings if you multiply it by 3 years, but there's also no more exposure.
Right.
You got locked up.
Yep, I understand. It's a point well taken. Anyone else? Mr. Crumweedy?
That makes it easier to budget too for the next couple of years. And you
Right.
can also work in that spraying, if that's an issue, work it in next year.
Yep. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
So what are we gonna do about the spraying? Is that just a different?
The committee will have to address that separately next month or in some month down the line.
Well, we had this on spraying, but for the most part, we didn't. Yeah, we did not spray any spraying. I think,
That's not right. So, yeah, it's unfunded, so, again, we're gonna have to go back and figure out where the money's coming from.
Yep, yep.
and it was gonna be as needed anyway, and hopefully it won't be.
Okay, anyone else? Mrs. Awful?
Well, what happens if we're not happy with their work for 3 years?
Well, you want to answer that? I mean, it's part of their contract to do the job, but we've had satisfactory performance in that regard from them in the past. By and large, they're not perfect, nobody is, but I think their performance has been satisfactory, so I think we can expect the same level of performance.
If there was an issue, they seemed cooperative to take care of it.
The maintenance supervisor also inspects their work, and anything that's not right brings to our attention to the committee, and he gets corrected.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It does have that number for spraying.
So the last time we paid for spraying was June 30th of 16. M&L did the work, and we spent $947.60 between here and the courthouse for the entire place. The cost of all that tree work, Donna, was November of 2016. A company called Marquis did it for $9,500.
Right, I just wanted to make sure they were two different entities now.
Yep, yep.
Mr. Whitlow, did you have something?
I was going to say, in regard to Halls, I think they're pretty reputable. They've proven their worthiness over the years, and I've known those people for a long time, and they're real honest, good people. So,
Okay, Mr. Anderson?
What's M&L paid out of contract services?
Yes.
Is that what I thought? How does that line item look in management? Pretty bleak? Okay.
It's bad.
Okay, anyone else? Seeing no one else, the clerk will call the roll, please.
Kokenauer.
Yes.
Crowe. Yes. Curtis. Yes. Hasbargen.
Yes.
Johnson. No. Crumweedy.
Yes.
Lemay.
Yes.
McGinnis.
Yes.
McTaggart.
Yes.
Awful. Yes. Persley.
Yes.
Raymond.
Yes.
Shore.
Yes?
Sticknot.
Yes.
Whitlow.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Behrens.
Yes.
Bills.
Yes.
Bowman.
Yes.
18 to 1.
That motion's approved 18-1. Tax Committee, Mr. Sticknot.
committee reviewed the claims. It was moved by McTaggart and seconded by Awful to pay the claims, subject to county board approval. Motion carried by a roll call vote. There were no public comments. The department heads gave their monthly reports. Fancher reported the primary election is March 20. The public testing of tabulation equipment is taking place. It is a requirement before every election. Election judge training for approximately 108 election judges was held March 1st, March 2nd at the community center in Crescent City. Early voting has commenced. The precincts will be open this Saturday before the election until noon for early voting. Also, 1,040 statements of economic interest were mailed. Fancher said this covers 1,257 positions that are required to file in Iroquois County. Lastly, a DevNet representative will be on site next week to continue training with the newly hired tax extension clerk. Supervisor of Assessments Bob Whistler reported final notices have been sent out and we should be able to roll to the Department of Revenue next week. This is 2 weeks ahead of last year. In regards to flooding, the governor declared Iroquois County as a disaster area. This automatically triggers people to be eligible for assessment relief for the assessment year of the flood. A notice will be published in the newspaper and forms will be available in the assessment office on the county's website. Finance Director Anita Speckman provided the dog licensing activity report. The amount budgeted for the year is $83,500 and $21,175 has been processed for the year. Past due notices and renewals for April were mailed last week. Speckman said she looked into the matter of court hearings for unpaid licenses. The last court date was December. There hasn't been another court date due to trying to catch up with the control process. Speckman also spoke with Circuit Clerk Lisa Hines and was asked if court could be put on hold for the unpaid licenses because their office is also busy at this time. Speckman noted liens used to be put on homes when a license went unpaid, but that has been discontinued. The process is now turned over to a collection agency. Tax Chairman Spicknot read an update regarding animal control. The Wetzik Animal Hospital was flooded and had some damage, but Dr. Yusuf hopes to be open again within 7 to 10 days. During the flood, they received 27 dogs, 10 cats, 1 bird, and 1 hedgehog. Dr. Yusuf was able to return to his clinic to retrieve medicine to treat aggressive or highly excited animals. However, Animal Control Warden Erica Turner was bitten by one of the aggressive dogs. Dr. Yusuf's nurses assisted while the clinic was flooded. Extra cages had to be purchased to accommodate the animals in the shelter, and space was rented at Jefferson Plaza. IC PhD Administrator D. Shivers stressed to the committee how helpful Dr. Yusuf's staff was during the flood for families with animals. The entire staff went above and beyond and should be recognized for their hard work and dedication. Spicknot asked how Dr. Yusuf's nurses could be compensated for the hours they worked for the county. Speckman said there was nothing budgeted, but the emergency declaration allows the county board chairman to spend funds in an emergency situation. This is something Speckman would have to look into further, and Dr. Yusuf would need to document the hours and services provided. Dan Persley suggested time off with pay. However, it was explained that Dr. Yusuf's nurses are not county employees, but they were doing county jobs by providing services to animal control clients during the flood. During old business, Spicknot contacted the Illinois Association of Animal Control and is awaiting an application from them. As there was no further business to come before the committee, it was moved by Awful and seconded by Whitlow to adjourn at 9:28. Motion carried by a voice vote. All of which is respectfully submitted. And I move for its adoption.
Motion on the floor to approve the tax committee report. Is there a second? Mr. Mr. Persley seconds. Are there any questions or comments? Mrs. Crowe?
We have a mitigation plan that we paid a lot of money for and spent a whole lot of time on. And I was fairly confident that part of that plan included animals. So my question is, where is that plan? And the second comment I have is that that's going to be an ongoing problem with the location of the animal control. And there are going to be recurring costs involved in that. So that needs to be looked at in a different manner. Something needs to happen to avoid those costs recurring to the county. And thirdly, I don't know, if they're employees of Dr. Yusuf's, and he's a department head, then if he's employing extra people, is that not his, before he hires people, should he not know how he's going to pay them?
That's not my decision to make. Wasn't that addressed in finance?
Something finance said there might be emergency funds in the report, I thought.
Mr. Anderson?
If I remember right, nothing was addressed in finance. It failed. So
You're saying it was spoken about, but nothing, that it failed, nothing failed.
The motion to approve the finance report failed.
Yeah.
I think some of the things that Mrs. Crowe brought up are matters that haven't been fully identified yet, so I think until we have a better picture of them, we can't really make any decision or comment in that regard, because we don't know exactly what we're talking about in terms of compensating his employees. I think what was relayed to me was it was very, very small, but we need to know what it is before we can really look at it.
I agree with you in that answer, but it's a given that there's going to be continued problems with that facility in floods and animals being located there and people getting there and taking care of animals. And like I said, in the mitigation report, I was fairly certain that we spent a lot of hours up here doing in-kind work, that there was a plan for that. And in fact, it was in the flood of '08, we were just really hustling around to get that plan done. A firm out of Kentucky helped right there. It was about $200,000.
Do you know the whereabouts of the report?
Mrs. Crowe is speaking of the countywide natural hazard mitigation plan. 5-year plan, it has since expired. I brought this up at the last special county board meeting. It is something that is supposed to go through my office, and I mentioned that I have not been able to update it. I started to try to update it back in after the floods of 2015. I wasn't able to get very far. In terms of emergency animal shelters, I don't remember that being part of the plan, but Ms. Crowe, you were there for that plan, so I'll have to defer to you when that was created. I believe you. Ms. Crowe points towards a valid issue of the private business does always flood. So we have an agreement, a verbal agreement with Jefferson Plaza to use that as a temporary emergency shelter during disasters, and for the most part it works pretty well. Dr. Yusuf is currently renting that place, the Jefferson Plaza, for his private business, not for the emergency pet shelter. There are some costs and that have already been mentioned. I have those numbers, and I'll give those to the county board in my full report soon, this evening.
Anyone else? Mrs. Johnson?
In regards to the extra cages that were purchased, where will those be kept so that extra cages wouldn't have to be purchased again?
I have no idea if that's Dr. Yusuf's area.
I understand that, but you oversee that area as well, so maybe that could be put in that plan that everybody's talking about so that we can follow up with that. And then I think that Eric answered my question about, so when the actual flood was going on, the animals that were at Jefferson Plaza were there free of charge, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Anderson?
I would just like to ask Bob, you got 2 weeks ahead of this year, or this year you got 2 weeks ahead? Just, you worked a little harder? No? Had less things to do? What was the change?
A little more, I mean, we got a couple people trained and after hiring a couple new people, so we got a little more efficient. And so we're plugging away, but it's an ongoing. Now, obviously, with the assessment stuff, my summer is going to get busy with flood assessments, depending on how many people apply. So
I just want to make sure that was, I mean, it's noted in the minutes, but that's good.
It has nothing to do with the fact that he's up for reappointment next month.
No. Next year we expect 3 weeks earlier.
if anybody wants to know, though, between damage assessments, there's going to be a minimum of 5, possibly up to 8 houses that will be determined substantially damaged outside the city limits of Watsika. So they'll either have to be elevated, destroyed, or moved.
Okay, anybody else have any questions about the tax committee report? Seeing none, the clerk will call the roll, please.
Crowe. Yes. Curtis. Yes. Asbargen. Yes. Johnson. Yes. Trumweedy.
Yes.
Lemay.
Yes.
McGinnis.
Yes.
McTaggart.
Yes.
Awful. Yes. Pursley.
Yes.
Raymond.
Yes.
Shore.
Yes.
Sticknot.
Yes.
Whitlow.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Barons. Bills.
Yes.
Bowman.
Yes.
Kokenauer.
Yes.
19-0.
That motion is approved, 19-0. Health Committee, Mr. McTaggart.
Mr. Chairman and members of the county board, your committee, to whom was referred to health, would beg leave to submit the following report on matters before them. Your committee met at the Administrative Center on March 6, 2018 at 9:30 a.m. Members present were McTaggart, Kokenauer, Awful, Pursley, and Whitlow. Trumweedy was absent. Also present, County Board Chairman John Schur, ICPHD Administrator Dee Shippert, Director of Environment Health, Terry Iman, County Board Member Marvin Sticknot. The meeting is called to order. It was moved by Awful and seconded by Whitlow to approve the agenda. The motion carried by a voice vote. There were no public comments. ICPHD Administrator Dee Shippert updated the committee on the flood. The Red Cross shelter housed a total of 91 people. Nursing services were provided as well as mental health services. Arrangements were made with the show bus and the high school for residents to take showers. Many donations were received by Walmart. Woodland is still under a boil order. Shippert attended the city council meeting to speak to the public about mold issues. The environment health staff is very busy doing food establishment inspections for reopenings. The health department is offering free water well sampling during March, but Shippert said she will extend this. Shippert said she is concerned groundwater has gotten into people's wells. A sample, surface water has gotten into people's wells. A sample has come back with E. coli in it. This does not apply to city water, this is for private wells. Cleaning kits were received from the Salvation Army. Personal care kits were donated from the Methodist Church. The WIQI radio station gathered 2 trailers full of donated items. A volunteer reception center was set up to provide proper training to individuals wanting to help with food cleanup, with the flood cleanup. A long-term recovery committee account has been established at First Trust and Savings Bank to receive donations. Clothing donations can be made to Angel's Closet in Milford, and food donations can be made to food pantries in the area. ICDHD Administrator D. Shippert distributed updated grants and contract spreadsheet. Shippert reported all grants were signed. Committee reviewed the program summary report for fiscal year 18. Shippert noticed the increase in chlamydia and hepatitis C cases. Director of Environmental Health Terry Iman spoke to the committee about food and restaurant inspections. Iman provided copies of inspection reports that are filled out for each inspection and explained the violation codes. There are currently 184 food establishments in Iroquois County. There are 86 high-risk establishments, 55 medium-risk establishments, and 43 low-risk. Iman said 72% of the time critical violations are spotted when environmental staff walks into the establishment's doors. As there was no further business to come before the committee, it was moved by Kokenauer and seconded by Alpha to adjourn at 10:37 a.m. All is respectfully submitted, and I move for its adoption.
There's a motion on the floor to approve the Health Committee report. Is there a second? Mrs. Awful. Are there any questions or comments regarding the report? Mrs. Crowe.
I'm just curious, what is the designation for a high risk and a medium
We
risk?
can't hear you, Mrs. Crowe. Could you speak in your microphone?
I'm just curious what designates a high-risk, low-risk, medium-risk establishment.
Well, it's a little more complicated than the short version, but I'll give you the short version. The short version is a high-risk establishment is a restaurant that prepares and cooks food on site from scratch. So, like a place that you go in that has a home-cooked meal. A medium risk is someplace like McDonald's, where their food comes in pretty much prepared, and they just cook it. And a low risk is someplace like Scotchman's, where they might sell sandwiches, or someplace that sells, like nachos and cheese, or, that kind of food. That's a very, very shortened version. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's the gist.
That's good, thanks.
Are there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, the clerk will call the roll.
Curtis. Yes. Passbarger. Johnson. Yes. Crumweedy.
Yes.
Lemay.
Yes.
McGinnis.
Yes.
McTaggart.
Yes.
Awful. Persley.
Yes.
Raymond.
Yes.
Shore.
Yes.
Sticknall.
Yes.
Whitlow.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Barons.
Yes.
Bills.
Yes.
Bowman.
Yes.
Kokenauer. Crow.
Yes.
18-0. That motion is approved 18-0. Judicial and Public Safety, Mr. Barons.
Mr. Chairman, members of the county board, the committee to whom it refers to judicial and public safety would beg leave to submit the following report on matters before them. Your committee met at the courthouse on March 7, 2018 at 3 p.m. Members present were Barron, McGinnis, Crow, Lemay, Awful, and Whitlow. Attorney Colonel Staff. Also present, probation supervisor Barb King, 911 Director Eric Raymond, and County Board Chairman John Shore. Meeting was called to order. It was moved by Jed Whitlow, second by Vince Lemay to approve the agenda. Motion carried by a voice vote. There were no public comments. Probation Supervisor Barb King provided the committee with the 2017 year-end report from Whitlow Toxicology Labs that documents the trending drugs in the area. King explained the report also includes Indiana. The Probation and Court Services Activity Report for February was reviewed with the committee. The committee reviewed Circuit Clerk Lisa Hines' monthly report. 911 Director Eric Raymond distributed the EPSD report for February. Raymond reported the employee on FFLA leave had returned to work as scheduled. Raymond noted this will decrease the amount of overtime hours. The joint dispatch staff handled all flood-related calls very well. Chad McGinnis asked if the flood-related calls were reported as 911 calls or non-emergency. Raymond answered if the call is placed in 911 to appear in the call count. Donna Crowe noted the increase in non-emergency calls for February. Raymond said the increase could be
A motion on the floor to approve the judicial and public safety report. Is there a second? Mrs. Awful seconds. Are there any questions or comments on the report? Seeing none, the clerk will call the roll, please.
Hessbargen. Johnson. Crumweedy. Levine.
Yes.
McGinnis.
Yes.
McTaggart. Apple. Crisley.
Yes.
Raymond.
Yes.
Shore.
Yes.
Sticknot.
Yes.
Whitlow.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Barron's.
Yes.
Bills.
Yes.
Bowman.
Yes.
Pokenauer.
Yes.
Crow. Curtis. 19-0.
That motion's approved 19-0. Transportation and Highway Committee, Mr. Bills.
Mr. Chairman, members of the county board, the committee conferred transportation and highways as they submit a report on the matters before them. Your committee met at the Iroquois County Highway Building on March the 9th, 2018 at 9 a.m. Members present were Bills, Hashbargen, Johnson, and Chad McGinnis. Charlie Alt, Donna Crow, and Kevin Coleman were absent. Also present, County Engineer Joel Moore, County Board Chairman John Schur, County Board Member Marvin Sticknot, and Lindy Davis of the Times Republic. The meeting was called to order. There was no public comment. The planning and financial reports for the month were reviewed. It was moved by Larry Hashbargen and seconded by Chad McGinnis to pay the bill, subject to county board approval. A roll call vote was taken. Motion carried. County highway was $54,400. County road was $2,648. Township motor fuel tax was $50,216, and county motor fuel tax was $35,231. County Engineer Joel Moore presented a resolution for resurfacing County Highway 8. Moore explained the cash settlement from the wind fund was $1.2 million, and the cost of resurfacing is $1.1 million. It was moved by Chad McGinnis, and seconded by Sherry Johnson, to approve the resolution for the improvement for resurfacing on County Highway 8. That motion carried by voice vote. A supplemental resolution for general maintenance was also discussed. The original resolution was for $1 million, but an additional $100,000 was moved for culverts and striping and adding. It was moved by Hashbargen, seconded by Johnson, to approve a $100,000 supplemental resolution for maintenance. A roll call vote was taken. That motion carried. Moore informed the committee of upcoming projects, which include a paving project in Aspen, a township bridge replacement on Gate Line Road, a township bridge replacement in Circle and Belmont Township, and a federal bridge in Narga, and that's a bridge south of Narga. Moore discussed damages due to recent flood. There was a lot of shoulder damage on South 2nd Street in Waseca and at the bridge in Milford. Equipment purchases include 2 new tandems and a print head for a large format printer. Moore is in contact with a printer company regarding a lease agreement. The cost of the new printer on a 5-year lease is about 5-year lease agreement at 0% interest. Financing is $25,000. Under new business, Johnson said Marine Red Cross volunteers requesting detailed maps of the area to assist flood victims. Johnson asked if a book could be put together for mass production in the event of another disaster situation. Moore suggested the director, Eric Cece, put something together and Moore could print it. Also, Johnson asked what could be done about the debris that is being left on the road she had seen or she had discussed with Moore. House trail cameras ready to do different things. During old business, Johnson asked for the status of Moore's mapping computer equipment. Moore said that he had not moved forward with the finance director, Anita Speckman, sent to him, and they should fall in line with everything he has to do for the IDOT. As there's no further business to come before this meeting, it was moved by Johnson, and second by Hagsworth, to adjourn at 9:45 a.m. That motion carried, all this is respectfully submitted, signed by all members present, and I would move for the adoption of this report.
There's a motion on the floor to approve the Transportation and Highway Committee report. Is there a second? Mr. Hasbargen seconds. Are there any questions or comments about the report? Mr. Persley?
I have kind of a silly question. I'm curious about, on the first page, about 3/4 of the way down, it says Federal Bridge in Anarga. What does that mean?
Well, it's
Federally funded.
Federally funded bridge project,
Pardon me?
a federal funded bridge project that, and you say south of Nargett, it's actually south of, what's the next little town we call it, Delray?
Delray.
Yeah, it's a little south of there, isn't it?
No.
Was it pretty-
No, it's between Delray and Onarga, just south of the Onarga slab.
And so it'd be
So is that up to the county to take care of that?
No, it's a township bridge.
township
Or
bridge.
township?
Yeah, it's township
It is.
bridge. But they can work with, get the federal money for them, and if it's built right, we'll have
Thank you.
10% out of county bridge, 10% probably out of the township, and they'll get the bridge.
Any other questions or comments on the report? Seeing none, the clerk will call the roll, please.
Johnson. Crumwee.
Yes.
Lemay.
Yes.
McGinnis.
Yes.
McTaggart. Awful. Pursley.
Yes.
Raymond.
Yes.
Shore.
Yes.
Sticknot.
Yes.
Whitlow.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Barron's.
Yes.
Bills.
Yes.
Bowman.
Yes.
Hokenhour.
Yes.
Crow. Curtis. Hasbargen. 19-0.
That motion's approved 19-0. Next on the agenda is claims. Is there a motion to approve the claims? Mr. Curtis? Is there a second? Mr. McTaggart? Are there any questions or comments regarding the claims? Seeing none, the clerk will call the roll, please.
Crumwee.
Yes.
Lemay.
Yes.
McGinnis.
Yes.
McTaggart. Awful.
Yes.
Pursley.
Yes.
Raymond.
Yes.
Shore.
Yes.
Sticknot.
Yes.
Whitlow.
Yes.
Anderson. Barron's.
Yes.
Bills.
Yes.
Bowman.
Yes.
Hokenhour.
Yes.
Crow. Curtis. Hasbargen. Johnson. 19-0.
The motion's approved 19-0. Appointments you have in front of you. Is there a motion to approve the appointments? Mr. Anderson, is there a second? Second by Mr. Crumweedy. Any question or comments on the appointment? All in favor say aye. Opposed, same sign. That motion passes. Old business. First item under old business will be going into executive session to have a discussion and action on the telecommunicator union matter. Is there a motion to enter into executive session? Mr. Whitlow. Is there a second? Mr. Raymond. Would you call the roll, please?
Lemay.
Yes.
McGinnis.
Yes.
McTaggart.
Yes.
Awful.
Yes.
Pursley.
Yes.
Raymond.
When they get out of here, we need to pass this out to
Yeah.
every board member.
Yes.
Shore.
Yes.
Sticknot.
Yes.
Whitlow.
Yes.
Wait till the other people leave the room.
Anderson. Barron's.
Any extra copies,
Bills.
bring them back here.
Bowman.
Yes.
Hokenhour.
Yes.
Crow. Curtis. Hasbargen. Johnson. Crumweedy.
Yes.
19-0.
That motion is approved 19-0. We will now enter into executive session.